the Trump transition is going on. In the meantime, the president-elect is weighing in on what's going to happen on January 20th. Just moments ago on a Truth Social, the president-elect wrote this. As everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan is coming from Mexico, composed of thousands of people. It seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States. And it's
All right, everybody, welcome back to another deep dive with yours truly today. Today, we're going to be looking at some stuff about international trade, some really big pronouncements from President-elect Trump that could really shake things up globally. Our source material for this deep dive is a Fox Business article from November 25th, 2024, and it's packed with enough intrigue to make your head spin.
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting here is that, Trump's chosen to announce these tariffs on Canada and Mexico, two of our closest trading partners, on Truth Social. So it seems to signal a pretty significant shift in U.S. trade policy, and the potential ripple effects are enormous, not just for these countries, but for the entire global economy.
So let's cut to the chase. What is Trump proposing?
Well, according to the Fox Business article, Trump's plan is to slap a 25% tariff on LL products coming from Mexico and Canada. This would go into effect as soon as he takes office on January 20th, 2025. The stated reason: the flow of illegal immigrants and drugs across the border, which Trump has been calling an invasion. He's demanding both Mexico and Canada take action to stop it.
25% on everything. That's a massive tax. I mean, think about all the goods that come from those countries. Cars, produce, electronics, the list goes on and on. This could really impact a lot of industries, not to mention what it could do to prices for consumers.
Exactly. And speaking of impact, the article really zeroes in on fentanyl as a major driving force behind this decision. Trump specifically called it out, saying these tariffs will stay in place until the flow of drugs and illegal immigration is stopped.
Now, for those of you who might not be totally familiar with fentanyl, it's a synthetic opioid that's way more potent than heroin. It's often laced into other drugs, and is sadly responsible for a huge number of overdose deaths. It's a truly devastating crisis, and it's clear Trump is trying to use these tariffs as a tool to combat it.
It's a tragic situation, and it's interesting that Trump is also targeting China with a 10% tariff on all goods due to the role of Chinese precursors in fentanyl production. This kind of raises the question of how effective tariffs can be in combating drug trafficking. I mean, it's a complex issue, and there's no easy solution.
You mentioned the potential impact on consumers earlier. Didn't Walmart issue a warning a while back about tariffs potentially leading to higher prices? Could this be a case of deja vu for shoppers?
Yes, back in. Back when Walmart warned that tariffs could lead to higher prices for consumers, if these new tariffs go into effect, we could see a noticeable jump in the cost of goods, especially those coming from Mexico, Canada, and China.
So if these tariffs are meant to curb the flow of fentanyl from China, what kind of pushback are we seeing from them?
Well, Trump has accused China of not keeping its promises to crack down on fentanyl production and trafficking. He claims he's spoken to Chinese officials about it, but hasn't seen any real action.
Sounds like things are already tense between the U.S. and China, and this is just adding fuel to the fire. Is there anything more to back up these accusations against China?
The Fox Business article cites a report from the Heritage Foundation titled, "Holding China and Mexico Accountable for America's Fentanyl Crisis." This report claims the Chinese Communist Party is actively pushing fentanyl into the U.S.
That's a pretty serious allegation. What does the report say about how this is happening?
It details how fentanyl precursors are shipped from China to Mexico through various routes, highlighting the sophisticated networks involved in this illegal trade.
Wow. So we've got potential trade wars brewing, a devastating drug crisis, and now this alarming report about China's involvement. It's like a tangled web with so many different threads. I'm really curious to hear more about what Canada's reaction has been to all this.
Well, Canada's Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc issued a joint statement highlighting the strong trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada. They pointed out that Canada buys more from the U.S. than several other major countries combined, and emphasized that Canada takes border security very seriously and works closely with U.S. agencies to combat the fentanyl crisis.
So it sounds like Canada is trying to appeal to reason and cooperation, maybe even reminding Trump that they've been a strong ally. But given his strong stance, do you think those pleas are going to make a difference?
That's a great question. And it leads to a much bigger picture discussion about the ongoing tension between globalization and protectionism. I mean, President-elect Trump's actions here seem to be pushing towards protectionist policies that are meant to protect domestic industries and jobs. However, those policies can lead to unintended consequences like trade wars and economic instability.
It sounds like we've got a lot to unpack here. I'm particularly interested in what all this means for the average person like you and me. We've already touched on the potential for higher prices at the store. But could there be other ramifications we haven't even considered?
Absolutely. And that's what we'll delve into next as we explore the potential economic impact of these tariffs, not just on the countries involved, but on individual consumers as well. You know, when we think about the economic impact, it's easy to get lost in the big numbers, talking about, GDP and trade deficits. But
Right.
at the end of the day, these policies really boil down to what you see at the grocery store or when you're shopping online.
It's so true. It's like you said earlier, it's the price of that carton of eggs or that new phone.
Right.
That really hits home for most people. And if those prices start going up
Yeah.
because of these tariffs, well, it's going to impact how people spend their money,
Yeah.
and that can have a ripple effect throughout the whole economy.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual consumers either. Think about businesses that rely on imported goods. If the cost of those goods goes up, they've got a tough choice. Either absorb those costs and potentially lose profits, or pass those costs along to their customers in the form of higher prices.
You mentioned cars earlier. Let's say a car manufacturer uses parts from Mexico. If those parts suddenly become 25% more expensive, it stands to reason that the price of the car is going to go up too.
Right. Right.
And that could make people think twice about buying a new car.
Exactly. And if fewer people are buying new cars, that impacts the auto industry dealerships and even the jobs associated with those sectors. It's a domino effect.
This is making me think back to that Walmart warning again. It feels like they were sounding the alarm about this very scenario.
They were. And their warning really underscores the interconnectedness of the global economy. We live in a world where goods and services flow freely across borders, and disruptions in one part of the world can have far-reaching consequences.
It makes you wonder if there are other ways to address the fentanyl crisis without resorting to these sweeping tariffs. I mean, are there alternative solutions that could be more targeted and less disruptive to the economy?
There are definitely different approaches to consider. For example, increased investment in drug prevention and treatment programs, stronger law enforcement efforts to crack down on drug trafficking, and closer collaboration with other countries to address the issue at its source could all be part of a multifaceted solution.
And what about addressing the root causes of illegal immigration? I know it's a complex issue. Wouldn't tackling the factors that drive people to leave their home countries in the first place be a more effective long-term solution than just trying to seal the border with tariffs?
That's a really important point. It's crucial to address the underlying economic, social, and political issues that contribute to migration flows. This could involve things like promoting economic development in sending countries, addressing climate change impacts that displace populations, and advocating for human rights and democratic reforms.
It seems like we're talking about a paradigm shift, moving away from punitive measures like tariffs towards more collaborative and holistic solutions. But do you think there's an appetite for that kind of approach, especially given the current political climate?
That's a great question. It definitely requires a shift in thinking, both domestically and internationally. But I think the potential benefits of a more cooperative approach are significant.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential economic fallout of these tariffs, and we've explored some alternative solutions to the fentanyl crisis and illegal immigration. But what about the geopolitical implications? What could this mean for relations between the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and China?
Well, if history is any guide, these tariffs could certainly escalate tensions and lead to retaliatory measures. We've already seen Canada respond with a statement emphasizing their strong trade relationship with the U.S., but it's possible they could impose counter tariffs on American goods, which would further complicate the situation.
And China's not exactly known for backing down from a trade war. Didn't we have a pretty intense back and forth with them a few years ago over tariffs?
We did. It's certainly a possibility that China could respond in kind, which could lead to a full-blown trade war.
And what about Mexico? They seem to be caught in the middle of all this. What's their likely response going to be?
Mexico's response is a bit harder to predict. They have a complex relationship with the U.S., relying heavily on trade, but also facing pressure to address issues like immigration and drug trafficking. It's possible they might try to negotiate with the new administration, or they could seek to strengthen their trade ties with other countries to lessen their dependence on the U.S. market.
This all feels like a very high-stakes game of chess, with each country making strategic moves and trying to anticipate the other player's reactions. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, and it's important to remember that these decisions aren't made in a vacuum. There are domestic political considerations at play in each country, as well as broader geopolitical dynamics that can influence the course of events.
So we've got this tangled web of economic, social, and political factors all intertwined. It's almost overwhelming to think about. But I'm wondering, what can the average person do to stay informed and engaged in this complex issue? It feels like something that could have a real impact on our lives.
You're absolutely right. Staying informed is crucial. It can feel overwhelming for sure, but it is the first step.
It is. I know I'm definitely going to be paying close attention to how this all unfolds. This conversation has really highlighted how seemingly distant events can have ripple effects that hit much closer to home than we might realize.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to dismiss international trade disputes as something that only affects politicians and economists. But as we've discussed, these decisions can have a real impact on our daily lives. From the prices we pay for goods and services to the availability of jobs and the stability of the economy.
It also makes me think about how interconnected we all are globally. We're not just isolated nations anymore. We're part of a complex web of trade relationships, political alliances, and shared challenges like the fentanyl crisis. It seems like finding solutions requires a much more collaborative approach.
Yeah, I agree. In a world facing complex challenges like drug trafficking, climate change, and economic instability, going it alone isn't really a viable option. We need international cooperation and a willingness to engage in dialogue, even with those we might disagree with.
Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about today. We've gone deep into the potential implications of President-elect Trump's proposed tariffs, explored the complexities of the fentanyl crisis, and even touched on the broader themes of globalization and protectionism. It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope it sparks some curiosity in our listeners.
I hope so too. And I want to encourage everyone to keep digging deeper, stay informed, and to engage in thoughtful discussions about these important issues. After all, knowledge is power. And the more we understand about the world around us, the better equipped we are to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today and for helping us unpack this complex topic.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy diving into these conversations and exploring different perspectives.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, we're always here to help you make sense of the complex issues shaping our world. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.